Hello, hello.
Hey.
We are back. This is episode number 38 of podcast Biweeklycast. Host is still here. It's me, Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava Rudnitsky, and it's episode number 38.
Yes. What did I say?
Just
no
checking.
No? Oh, just checking. Levels, 38, episode number 38. We have a topic. Obviously, we don't have follow-up. Do you want to make any remarks before we jump into the thing?
Not really.
No.
Let's jump into a thing or the thing, or however you define it.
Or the thing. Yeah, let me try to define it, actually, right? The topic and why it's important or interesting, we will see. So the idea for this discussion, the background, I guess, is that there is a team I'm working with about which I very much believe that they can be a lot more successful, or kind of with the goals that team sets for themselves. It would be extremely beneficial and almost critically important if they adopt the fast-moving mindset and rebuild and re-envision their processes and approaches such that they can respond to requests they receive very quickly, and also on the projects or the things that they are advancing, iterate on them very, very quickly, because the area involves quite a bit of uncertainty and multiple different stakeholders, and kind of being fast and being able to iterate would be very valuable for that kind of environment. And I was thinking, not only thinking, I was talking to them and trying to both persuade and find ways on how to implement that practically, because it's one thing to have an idea and sell the idea. It's whole another thing to actually start living by that idea. So the topic was at the top of my mind. And then when I was on a trip, I was listening to one of the recent episodes of the podcast called Focus, and I know that you also listening to it. I don't remember which one. In recent times I listened to two of them, about the book Slow Productivity about favorite productivity hacks. And David Sparks, I think it's David Sparks, one of the hosts there, mentioned that he read in one of the book about an experiment which supposedly highlighted the importance of this being fast and how it's beneficial, maybe beneficial over being perfect or something along those lines. So this would be the topic to discuss, this moving fast versus moving maybe slower, but with the aspiration for greater quality.
So in an extreme example, there would be a team that iterates on daily basis, just tries, fails, corrects, tries something else, and learns from what it does. And on the other end of the spectrum would be a team that iterates once half a year, designing, reconsidering, debating, discussing, mapping, remapping, over-remapping, over-remapping, and so on.
Right. The idea would be kind of balancing the extremes of the spectrum would be precisely as you described. On one hand, you just try to do the best thing with the knowledge you have now, and you do something quick in order to kind of validate those ideas and maybe learn and check for something new, as opposed to spending days and weeks and maybe months trying to come up with a perfect plan and then trying to implement it, only to figure out that this whole thing was a shebang and we should have done it differently.
And if we imagine that there is a scale where 1 is this daily iterations and 40 is extremely slow iterations with all the meditation and discussions, where is this team that you're talking about right now, and where you would like it to get?
That's a complex scale out there. One is 1 day daily iteration, and 40 is
like every 180 days.
180 days iteration, like doing like
quite a scale. I know.
Calculation that's quite a scale. Let me calculate. Maybe I think that now they may be at 20, somewhere along those lines. But I think for them to be kind of more effective, they probably need to be at around 5-7. I would say, like practically. Not like daily kind of thing, but I have this concept of, or this idea of everything can be done in 2 weeks. That, of course, relative to the definition of what the done means, but I do believe that on anything that you might encounter, you can make very meaningful progress in 2 weeks, and that progress can be different for different situations. It might be like the actual implementation or building a prototype, or producing a coherent design that can be validated, or like whatever else, like depending on the situation. But you should plan for like 2-week like iteration cycle, and that would work for pretty much all of the things that you might encounter, at least in my line of business.
Well, I would say that managerial wise, it's kind of rigid, but you could just say like, let's release or let's do something with these lengths of strength. But what do you see as the main barrier for the team to get from 20 to 5 or 7?
Just, I think it requires operating somewhat differently.
So different decision making, different kind of planning.
Different.
And they don't want it, or they don't fully understand how it works.
No, I think no. It's not none of those things. I think it's just historically the way kind of all of the teams operated were both kind of slower and faster. It sounds counterintuitive, but it was. Like one more thing here would be focusing or trying to take on, because of this fast iteration, take on more individual things per unit of time, rather than focusing more deeply on a smaller number of units. Like if you have a monthly project and it requires all of your time, then you do one thing in a month. But then if you can figure out ways to do fast iteration, it may open an opportunity for you to do 4 things in the same month, maybe with a different level of detail than if you focus on one thing entirely. But then at the same time, you may have helped for other people or for other teams in the scale of months, and allow them to move their progress, thus amplifying your contribution or impact on what the company does.
So we basically assume that the culture that the team has been working with has always been more deliberate and quality focused. And do you think it could be related to making mistakes, like people don't want to fail somewhere or make wrong assumptions? What could be the reason of the resistance?
This is really kind of interesting, because this was not the direction I was thinking to take this. I was not necessarily thinking of making this trade-off between speed and quality, but just
that's why you named the episode Better or Faster, right?
Yes, you know, like the key problems in computer science are cache invalidation and naming things. So that this would be the example of the second one. What's interesting about this whole thing is that I do think that if you are able to do things faster and iterate faster, that does not have to mean the compromise on quality. You would still be able to do great things, maybe even of a better quality, because you are able to iterate fast.
I think it doesn't have to be, but project managers usually use this triangular where they put time, quality, and price. And they say that, yes, you can do things fast and high quality, but it would cost you extra because you have to get the right people, you have to outsource some of the solutions, you have to, in order to speed up, you could pay overtime or do some other extra activities.
I don't disagree with that. I'm not. Early on in my career, I would also subscribe to this sort of thing and say, yeah, like there's a triangle, pick two, or if you move one side of the triangle, that inevitably means that you move those other two things. But now I think all of those concepts are flawed because the triangle and picking two, let's say, what would you trust more? A thing that's done on time, or a thing that was delayed and people needed to scramble to put it together?
That doesn't define my level of trust at all. I wouldn't trust either.
Interesting, because I think I would, like all things being equal, I would be more suspicious of a thing where it was, or you could have a general expectation that this can be done in like X amount of time, but it wasn't done, which may mean that, hey, this situation, this particular project might have had some specifics which were difficult to account for, and therefore the level of quality we expected from kind of industrialized, standardized process might not be applicable here because we had to deviate because of complexities. And at the same time, if things are just kind of stamped, then the quality of those things is going to be consistent. It might not be great to begin with, but at least it's consistent.
So am I getting you right that what you're implying is that some people might have this false choice between speed and quality, and you believe that you can increase speed while not losing the focus on quality? And the question you would like to discuss is, what are the ways or means to transform the culture into faster in terms of decision making?
Yeah, sort of, yes. I think I would love to explore this whole idea of not this being not either or situation and get kind of your perspective on this. And then if, depending of course on the conclusion that we come, whether it is possible for this to not be either or kind of thing, discuss ways how this can be implemented and so on.
I think it's hugely context dependent because let's say we have a spaceship company that builds spaceships. We can just say, like, well, guys, why don't you just release faster and launch a spaceship every month rather than every year? And well, it doesn't work that way. Like sometimes you actually need a year to design something, to build it, to put it together, to get the payment and all the stuff around. And then when you grow the capacity, you can do it faster. But for the first iterations, it's quite impossible.
Well, funny you should bring this example, because I think I heard this in one of the recent other podcasts that I listened to. They did, like, SpaceX did exactly that, right? They did more launches more regularly and on the cheaper side than any other space-going entity, and that allowed them to, not to say perfect, but substantially improved their reusable vehicles, and we now rely quite a lot on SpaceX spacefaring capabilities. And one might argue that they were able to get into this position because they were focused on iterating quickly rather than producing perfect designs over like decades.
I would say it's a different culture, because if you compare them to national space programs, it's just a different way of managing things, a different way of getting money, a different way of hiring and discharging people, a different way of getting promoted, managerial cultures and stuff. So it is kind of hard to compare, because plus they run different scale of projects and they focus on different KPIs, because since SpaceX is still focused on eventually making money, and just they are getting quite a lot of investment from the government, and but in the long run they still would like to make it commercial, while NASA never had that in mind, so their priority was very different.
And I guess the debate might be still open if this is a good or bad. Well, not good or bad thing is too black and white, but what are the downsides and benefits of each of those models?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that in terms of research and science, commercial way doesn't work, because like you basically don't get. Let me give you an example of marketing research. Like when you have to iterate fast, get small pieces of information, learn from them, do something else. You never get the big representation. You never get a lot of data. You never process much, because you move by chunks. You change all the time, and the next iteration you make is different from the first iteration. That's what sales teams quite often do. They make an assumption, they check it like super fast, then they move somewhere else. But it's very different from deep science, like and designing, let's say, artificial intelligence model.
Why? But aren't what we're seeing now is that the result of that fast iteration, right? Like new large language models are released like every half a year. Isn't this an example of fast iteration?
Well, it depends on your definition, because my fast, like we probably don't see what was the prep and how many iterations they took before the release, and what was the pace there, because maybe before the first launch and the public announcement of, let's say, GPT and OpenAI, what was the internal pace that they were moving with? Like how long they were working, like how many models they were trying, what was the team structure there? Were they all working on one big thing, or experimenting and trying to release multiple different things? There are different ways to do that. But I could potentially imagine that given the situation, you could sometimes hurrying up, ignore some aspects that require time and attention and effort, and some people just are too scared to do that. Like no, we should fully consider, we should check all the options, we should see all the risks. That's actually one of the things that people use as an argument, even from the tech world, about AI, that since they are iterating that fast, it's kind of hard to calculate all the risks and the pace of where it's coming, and see the impact and understand how it's going to change the entire world.
That's interesting. I think it has a point as well, that it's not universal that one thing can be universally good. But I do feel like still like there is a benefit if you can move and iterate fast. It's almost like if you can be fast with the simple things, because you've done them so many times, this simple thing becomes a building block that you can rely on to build something more complex. And then if you focus on iteration, yet again you start assembling those smaller building blocks into bigger building blocks, which you can effectively use, enabling you to do something that's more complicated and would otherwise take a lot of time, but because you solved, or like you got this muscle, you can produce high quality thing in the end.
I have an example here. I started talking about the research, and I was looking into the topic of how people behave at job interviews, and I ran into a few papers. One of them was a research that was 20 years long and it was still ongoing. They basically looked at the kids, they checked some of the indicators, and then they waited until they actually apply for jobs and how they, what kind of jobs they were taking, whether technical or non-technical, and how they were negotiating their salaries, how brave and risky they were at naming the assumptions and their first bets. And I read a similar paper about the similar thing, but people who tried to do it faster, like they didn't want to wait for 20 years to see when these people get. So what they did, they just changed it into a poll. Like people who just came to their first interviews, they would ask them about their childhood. They would ask them what games they were playing, what the environment was there, how do they think it impacted their decisions right now. And the data in these two papers not only just doesn't correlate, it sometimes shows the very opposite conclusions. And my idea why is that because of the method that the second paper picked, it's just not realistic. Like people don't remember what games they were actually playing in the childhood and what was their attitude to specific sorts of things. And when researchers could observe it with their own eyes, they actually have hard facts saying like, yes, these kids played these kind of games, or like they got this kind of feedback. They were encouraged to do this and discouraged to do that. It's still a question about causation between the games and stuff and the salary and the jobs that they get. But I'm pretty sure that it's much more evidence-based than the second one, where people just say like, well, I believe that in my childhood I would play these games and not play those games.
Right, but to be honest, I don't feel like this is an example against this whole idea, because the sheer duration of the thing, I don't think, at least to me, is not necessarily indicative of the speed of the movement there. And if in the example where they just did the poll, that would be to me an example of sort of moving slow. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but they planned that thing, they executed it, and they got the result. And it was only as good as it could have been. Like we have no evidence of whether if those folks did one poll, they got back the results, they analyzed it, they tweaked and ran again another poll and another poll. And who knows, like in those 20 years, which thing might given us better result. That's number one. But then those researchers who did the 20-year research, I would expect, I don't know that this is a pure speculation, but I would expect them to have iterated on the approach or interactions with each individual participant. And I would imagine that maybe some of the participants would be dropping out or would be excluded from the research for whatever reason, and new ones were added to observe their behavior with improved and better protocols. And I think that would be an example for me of moving fast, like figure out a way to gain new substantial knowledge about the space we operate in the fastest possible way, so that we can apply to make our thing better than would otherwise be possible.
The thing I wanted to illustrate with this example was not about the improvements to the process, because the improvements to a specific activity could be done with quite short iterations, because you see that you have failed here and there. But the decision-making thing, like they don't come to any conclusions before they see first job interviews of this person. Like they can see what they can tweak, what they can improve, what can they do better at the stage where they are, but they can jump to the very, very end. While people with the polls, they could see the conclusions, agree or disagree, and then decide whether they like do over or change something or change the questions. But when you have limited amount of time, let's say they have the budget just for 5 months, like that's all they have. It's impossible to integrate another decision-making model into a short-term project, into a short-term research. Like you can't get this data
Oh, is it impossible? Maybe if you are kind of smart and creative about this, we might find a way to do that.
Let's roll back to some of our previous examples.
Okay.
Like engineers have been designing some kind of engines for quite a while, and then SpaceX comes in and they start iterating on the research and designs and things that have been created before them, and they test it, they try it, but you can't really do it like if you roll back 40 years back, and there is no research, there is no data around that, there is nothing to iterate on. The same about artificial intelligence, like all these labs and things, they have been doing all the prep and training the models and trying it on different types of models. And only then, when it got kind of public and kind of available and came to the market, it became possible to iterate faster.
I'm not sure I kind of agree with that, but how do we know that those folks who were doing original research were not iterating? Maybe they were just iterating a bit slower, and it was not a priority for them, and they maybe over-indexed on design and stuff. Or yeah, of course that there might have been physical limitations there. We kind of the degree of the technology that there was available to them could not support any faster iteration that they did. But I guess that circles us back to this idea of everything is relative, and maybe for that day and age, what they did was fast. It's just I
know. Let's take an example of a failed product like Google Glass. I'm sorry if somebody doesn't consider it failed, but I think that by the time they tried it, there was not, it's my assumption, I'm not really deep into this topic, but you can correct me here. There was no really reliable tech to support the idea and to make it last long enough. Like the battery technology was just not there yet. And I'm sure, I can assume it's not there yet, even right now, to make it something really...
Yeah, there are challenges in that department still.
And like when they face this kind of barrier, there is no room for iterations because like all the battery tech is here. Like here are 3 options. We tried 3 of them. Nothing else exists. Like we can't overcome this specific barrier. It can't work longer without extra charge. Everything else is just a handicap, and it's really kind of impossible to keep the iterations until somebody creates a better way to store energy.
Interesting. I sort of agree with that, but I also sense that there might be some difference between different approaches and goals for iteration. And I think here in this example with Google Glass, of course, we don't know the inside story. So it's like a pure speculations and our construction of potential possible universes in which Google Glasses were created. But when we talk about that, it does feel like this is the project or an activity or like line of work with a particular end in mind, right? We want to build some smart glasses. We roughly envision what they should be capable of doing, and then we are setting out to say like, oh, all right, what's the best thing we can do to fit all the different constraints that we have, and that's fair. And through there are constraints, still the iteration can help you kind of optimize within those constraints. But I think things that I have in mind would be of a little bit more open-ended nature, right? Where instead of setting out to do a very specific thing and iterate towards it, you kind of iterate fast to learn and figure out what's possible, and then in the end hopefully maybe sort of construct the best thing out of what's possible. And I think the example I didn't included a quote from that book that was mentioned in the podcast that I mentioned, which reminded me of this idea. They have this anecdote, like I said, that David Sparks said that there was an experiment, but turns out, like reading the book and kind of checking the internet is just an anecdote. It's not. It was not a scientific experiment. It was not an experiment at all, as far as I can say. And the idea was that there was a pottery class, and the teacher there divided the class into groups and said that you will be graded differently. This group over here on the left, you would be graded on the quality of your work. Like the best thing, the better thing you can produce, the higher the grade would be that you get. And the other group on the right, they said, like, it's going to be sort of maybe a little bit simpler for you. You will be graded on the quantity, like the more pots or whatever else that they were doing you can produce by kilogram, the better. And the anecdote then goes to say that in the end of the day, that group that was focusing on quantity was able to produce work that was of a better or even higher quality than the folks over in the first group, because they iterated so quickly, they learned so much about what works and what doesn't, and those other folks tried to kind of pontificate too much about the perfect design, but then even if they got a perfect design, they were not able to execute on it and got suboptimal results. Like, mind you, this is all like to make it clear for our listeners, this is not an experiment. There is no science behind it. It's just a neat anecdote or parable that the book uses to indicate. But it feels, at least to me intuitively, it feels that there might be some truth to that, or maybe a little bit. No,
I kind of feel that it works for a specific type of things, but has huge limitation, because in this regard, most people come with the same zero level of skills, and they have to do them from scratch. Plus, they do it not that intellectually. Like, there's not much learning happening. You just see the results. You intuitively feel what to improve, and you do it better. You then have to discuss and talk about it, like, all right, it's a bit long, or it's a bit curvy, we should do it smoother. It's easier to things. If I can assume it's like a marketing campaign, ads, you have to iterate fast. Like you basically, but you need some data to analyze before you can come to a conclusion, because meta algorithms like take a few days to show the full capacity, and if you stop it, like I'm sure some of them you can't even stop earlier than 2 or 3 days. You have to get the algorithm run, and then you get the data, you analyze the data, you compare it to something else, and you make the next choice. It is quite fast in terms of iterations, but the learning process here is different, because some people, they just make very weird assumptions, like, oh, red shirts work better. It's not about what you were saying, it's not about the lights, it's not about the length, but just the shirt you're wearing. And these false lessons that you use during the iterations could actually like lead you somewhere else, and companies spend thousands, sometimes millions of dollars if they just make wrong assumptions on these learning spots in between the iterations. And when we talk about some complicated engineering things where you consider a complex issue, let's say, like, I can imagine we are designing a system to protect something from someone. There are so many factors you have to consider that learning time in between the iterations could take much longer than in the pottery anecdote or in the marketing ad example.
Oh, that's a great thought. I do agree that the feedback is like in this process is important. That's the crux of the learning, right? Without getting any sort of feedback, no learning is happening. That's number one, and then obviously number two, the quality of that feedback is also important, because if you get feedback that is irrelevant to the things that you are fiddling with, like even though technically it's feedback, it's not helping you to learn and figure out what works better than the other thing. That's all true, and I agree with that. What I would layer on top of this is that I think there are possibilities to optimize for that, in a sense, like to optimize the process to get more of higher quality feedback sooner, that we can kind of learn from it. And if we let's say, like even in, like with computer mice, like, is it right to say computer mice or is it computer mouse?
Simple is mouse. I don't think it's mouses, I think.
Yeah, the computer mice, right? That they do the clicking mechanism there is like obviously super important because you do that multiple times a day, like multiple times a minute sometimes, and you want to find a mechanism that works better and doesn't break. But it would be a bad way of getting feedback and kind of slow way of iterating if you release mouse, get it into the hands of users to then learn that, hey, it breaks after 3 months and stuff like that. And therefore you build a machine that would click that mouse in your factory so that you can learn and get feedback from that faster. But that this is relatively straightforward example, and I believe that in many lines of work, there must be, well, that's belief, and therefore I can be a little bit more categorical here that there must be opportunities to get that feedback faster. And like to me, that this whole thing about faster versus better would be, I guess, now boiled down to the idea of finding ways to get feedback faster so that we can improve, like useful quality feedback faster that we can improve.
I could also refer you to a book we read. It was about projects, how great big things get done.
How big things get done. We will put the link to that episode where we discuss in the show notes.
Yep. That's a very YouTuber type thing to say, but the idea was about Pixar, if I'm not mistaken, that at a certain stage of designing their animated movie, they iterate really fast. Like they check multiple ideas, then they don't get deep into an idea. They make a very, very draft of it. The drafts that survive get a lot of feedback, gets improved, go into story cards. From story cards, it gets to a very, very simplistic animation. And when they learn the feedback from different focus groups and people, and they improve and improve. But then the production stage, when like the script is written, still takes them a while. Like the script writing could be fast. Like they don't need the full script, and then they don't pick from a number of full scripts. They can check the concept, check the idea, check the demo, check the demo of the demo, and this thing could be. But then when you actually have to draw things and make the production, and it still doesn't get that faster. Like you can't. You still need hours of people who would do the post-production, who would use the music, the special effects, synchronize everything, record the voices. Yes, like in certain ways you could technologically boost that, but it wouldn't like become a month out of 9 months. It could become 8 months out of 9, but still there is a capacity and the nature of the process you're running. So on the planning stage, you could iterate faster. On the production stage and then advertising stage and the releasing stage, things just go the way they go. Like there's not much thing you can do.
No, I think that this is a great point. I think that depending on what you are doing, and as you point out, the stage of the process, there might be certain constraints, like physical, like most of the time that would be physical constraints that you cannot overcome, right? If this is an audiobook of like 300 pages. I think that translates to about 8 hours of audiobook, roughly. You cannot do that faster, right? It's just no matter what, you cannot do that faster. And then maybe, I don't know, like depending on what you're doing, maybe if you're the voice artist, what you might do to improve is you try to do short. How do you pronounce the word? Excerpt? Is it excerpt, like the extraction from a book?
Yeah,
like excerpts. Like you take excerpts from different books and you try to perform them, and then you listen to that, and then maybe show to those other people. For that setting, you would not necessarily want to record the entire book to get feedback.
Yeah, but
then, of course,
the fact is that to create 9 hours of voice recording, you need to speak for 9 hours at least, sometimes more.
Well, aren't we lucky that on the receiving end of audiobooks we can speed it up to get this thing faster? But
there is still a constraint. Like, I think everything that goes above double faster.
Yeah, it's very difficult. But I'm sure that there would be YouTube videos saying about like this is how you learn to listen to audiobooks on 5x in 2 weeks or something along those lines. Yep, yeah, that's important. Thing and a consideration, right? That the physical, especially the physical kind of limitations or constraints can be there. They are always there, and maybe the winning recipe would be to find a way to navigate around that, to optimize around them, to kind of learn more and extract more knowledge.
And it is actually quite possible even to iterate here, because you could theoretically get 9 voice artists who could record 9 pieces, but is it the quality of the audiobook that you actually expect when 9 chapters are voiced by 9 different people? It's up to you. Like you can get the result faster. You can't really get a baby faster than 9 months, I assume.
No, you can't. Yes, I think there are different ways of looking at it. Not to get the baby in,
but to get an adoption and then another adoption and then another adoption.
If you need to,
well,
maybe, which might be a bad example in and of itself, but yeah, that this is very interesting and sort of inspiring in a certain sense. I think it also to me has some connections to this idea of deliberate practice, right? When you do want to iterate, but what would differentiate deliberate practice from just iteration is that feedback loop and active absorption and incorporation of the learnings into the next iteration. If you just iterate, then I guess that's fine, but you're not getting much from that.
That's why I think that reflection practices are the key here. Like in software development, it's retrospectives. I think it's the closest you can get to reflection process. Maybe if it's an old system, when you get to, what was it, refactoring? When you redesign or reconsider the entire thing, this is also a stage to reflect a lot and draw conclusions. And
that's interesting. And I think they pretty much want over this topic forward and back again. So would there be any last minute remarks you would want to make about this whole idea?
I probably would just say that the hashtag of this episode is "It depends." Because yes, like you can iterate fast, but it depends on a number of things. And sometimes you can't iterate fast, but it also depends on the number of things. And I really like the idea of being more focused on improvements and getting closer to reality in the fastest possible way. And I'm kind of afraid because sometimes I see people who take it to extremes. Like they push it from 7 to 1. And at this pace, they stop learning because they just don't get enough data. They don't have enough time to process the lessons, and then the whole purpose of speeding up kind of disappears.
I agree with you. I like the hashtag, and I'm kind of, while you were speaking, I started kind of judging in my head, like, how would the T-shirt with "It Depends" on the front look like? Because it might be an interesting thing to do. It might require some fast iteration to figure out the best design. I think one big learning for me from this discussion would be the idea that, like, everything is relative, and it depends in a sense that it may be, and it happens to me quite a lot, that I would get fascinated with an idea and then think that this is a good thing without necessarily fully understanding of the applicability domain of that area, of that idea. It might work really well with the thing that either I have in mind or something that I work day in and day out, and it's like, yes, this is the best thing that can be there. But then it also helps to kind of cross-check. All right, what about other domains? Like, what about other situations? Is the same thing holds true? Is the dynamics of different constructs the same? Is the same thing is going to be the best thing you can do? And most of the time, because it depends, it would not be the same. It would not be the same thing, and it is very important and useful to understand limitations of all of the different things and different ideas and approaches that we might take.
That's quite a philosophical ending for a conversation that started like, how do we get them faster?
No, but then it can be a question like, do we really need
Yeah.
How would it help, and where would it take us? And also, like, one more thing, it just really rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, this whole story from the book, because when I listened to the podcast, like the tertiary knowledge, when the David, the host, spoke about this as an experiment, I was almost ready to carry this further and talk to other people. There was an experiment. People did this thing, and they came to this result. I'm really glad that I chose this as a topic, which prompted me to do a little bit more research on the topic and figure out that that was just an anecdote. Don't believe everything you see, hear, or read on the internet.
Not only not believe, but reflect on things you hear, see.
Right, and hope if you do that, you would have some good weeks ahead of you.
Hope so. Good weeks.